We are here with our first discussion with two very interesting people who are now actually in the U.S. to understand what is going on in the American Jewish community in the past few months, which is very dramatic and interesting. So we'll say hello to our guests. Hello to Jodi Rudoren, the editor-in-chief of The Forward. Shalom.
Shalom, Anishma.
Good. Toda rabba. And Jay Ruderman, the president of the Ruderman Family Foundation. How are you?
Hi, Zvika.
So you're
Pleasure to join you.
Thank you very much. So you're in Brookline, Massachusetts. And Jodi, where are you based?
I'm in Montclair, New Jersey.
Okay.
The Brookline of New York.
Okay. So maybe we'll start with you, Jodi. As a journalist, and you run, probably one of the main news outlets for the Jewish community. How would you explain to an Israeli watching this what is going on in the American Jewish community in the past few months? And obviously that's based on the past 4 years of the Trump administration.
Yeah, I would say, the past 4 years of the Trump administration and just this remarkably intense, stressful year of 2020, where we had at least 3 major ongoing challenges, news stories, stressors for basically everybody in the world, in the country. But, between coronavirus, this very polarizing and difficult campaign, and the racial reckoning, the racial justice movement that sprung up mid-year after the killing of George Floyd, all 3 of those things individually and then break together have challenged American Jews in their lives, in their communities, in their organizations in myriad ways. I think each of them have enhanced or underlined or underscored the polarization that we had been seeing really growing over the last number of years through the Trump administration, which included a rise in anti-Semitic, both violence and hate speech. And so we've seen this kind of stark divisions exposed, and people really grappling, particularly within the American Jewish community, where people want to be unified around things like anti-Semitism and the threat it poses to us, or other Jewish values. They want to be unified, and they're finding out that we are more divided, more fractured, and frankly more different than sometimes feels comfortable. And those divides are both political and religious, and it's been very, very stressful. The other major trajectory or thing that we've been exploring and thinking about is the way that the coronavirus in particular and the push to close down work and workplaces, et cetera, and the stress on the economy have challenged Jewish organizations in the innovation sphere. And we've seen, and we can get back into this later, I'm sure, but we've just seen that, there are many, many parts of the Jewish world that I think were operating on models that didn't work for the increasingly diverse and fractured Jewish communities. And we've seen a little bit of a falling out of synagogues and other organizations that were ready to innovate and change to serve changing needs did very well in this environment, and organizations that were really stuck in old ways that worked for a prior generation have had a more difficult time. Right. So there's ways in which engagement has grown, whether in daily study virtually or services or social justice work. And there's other ways in which organizations have kind of atrophied because they aren't ready to adapt.
Right, and I'll just say the difference between the Israeli Jewish community and the American Jewish community is that here, our day schools, right, our Jewish day schools are public. Therefore, we don't have to worry about paying a lot of money for, and definitely when you're in an economic situation where you cannot necessarily pay for Jewish education. So I want to move to Jay, and I want to continue with that question and maybe talk about the organizational Jewish life. How has that been affected in the past year and also maybe in the past few months with what's been going on politically, but also just the situation of the COVID-19 virus?
Well, I think it's important to say that the American Jewish community, although Jews are a minority in the United States and represent, under 2% of the population, they're integral to American society. Jews occupy every sector of the American society, and like Jodi said, the pandemic, the Black Lives Matter, the political upheaval has really affected everyone, and I think that there was a real malaise and depression. And I think mental health is an issue that we really have to look at in terms of not just the Jewish community, but overall the world community. You know, and it's continuing into 2021. I mean, I think that the political upheaval that we're seeing in the United States, the real threat to the American democracy, is scary to Americans, especially scary to Jews, because as a minority, we all know that when there is upheaval, when there's hatred against others, it's going to come back on the Jews. I think Jewish American organizations have responded as well as they could have responded to move virtually. A lot of the institutional aspects of the community that we would take for granted, meetings, events, do not happen. They happen virtually. I do think, you know, my children are in Jewish day schools. They thankfully have been able to go in person. There's been testing. So far, it's worked out, you know, very well. The schools have not closed down, but synagogues are limited in the number of people that can go to synagogues. Those that are not Orthodox synagogues do meet virtually. Jewish camping, which is a big part of Jewish life and the continuity of Judaism.
By the way, I think it's probably maybe like one of the biggest in the educational sphere, right? I mean, here in Israel, we don't get it.
I think camping and the fact that camping didn't happen, I don't know if it will happen this summer, but I think it will have a huge impact on Jewish life. It's a huge part of Jewish identity for many young people across the Jewish community.
Right. So I want to stay with you for a second, Jay, and you have a background with AIPAC, which is, you know, the pro-Israel lobby. And I was wondering, you know, as a journalist who covers the Israeli-Jewish-American connection, when I saw a survey during the past election, presidential election, in the primaries, it showed Trump versus all the nominees for president from the Democratic Party in the Jewish vote. And if I remember correctly, if you put Trump versus people like Bernie Sanders, I think Sanders would get around 66% or something like that, which is a little bit less than the average Democratic vote from Jews. How do you explain that? Because many Israelis who see that are like, we don't get it. We don't get it. Like, why would they support someone like Bernie Sanders, who says terrible things about Israel, who some may say has certain anti-Semitic rhetoric, yet they'll vote for him?
Well, I don't know if I want to get into a hypothetical of a race between Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. However, I would say that I believe Israelis see Trump as what Trump has done for Israel. And the positives that have happened, pressure on Iran, moving the embassy to Jerusalem, recognizing the Golan Heights, peace treaties with Arab neighbors. I think most American Jews, while they may think these things are good, it's not at the top of the agenda. The top of the agenda is Jews are Americans, and they see the threat that Trump has as an extremely divisive president. And in fact, up until a few weeks ago, you know, led what is in all senses an insurrection and a coup against the United States government, and perhaps the worst crime that an American president has ever committed against the American people. So I think that as Americans, they're incensed of where Trump has brought this country, and the extreme divides that I think will take maybe generations to improve. So I think that's where the American Jewish community, it's not that they don't care about Israel. It's not that Israel's not important, but I just don't think that's where they're focused. They're focused about, you know, COVID, keeping themselves and their elderly parents alive, keeping themselves safe. looking at the economy and what impact it's having on them, you know, where their children are and what their the future for their children are in America, and their status as Jews in America. I think that that's what they're looking at. When you have attacks on minorities, whoever the minorities may be, the next attack is going to come against Jews. And I think we saw that in the siege of the Capitol, where you had all sorts of groups that had all sorts of agendas show up there. Some saying, listen, we're going to overthrow Satanists and Trump is our savior. And others who were purely anti-Semitic and racist. And there was a hodgepodge of groups up there, but a real threat to Jewish life. And I think as Jews who see themselves very much as part of the American Jewish culture, when you see something that is shocking, it's saying, okay, well, maybe we're not as safe as we thought we were.
Which is definitely dramatic. Yeah, definitely.
I just, you know, I feel like this is just such a red herring, a sort of perennial red herring question I get from Israelis. And when I was the bureau chief there for the New York Times, I would, you know, hear this all the time. Why is it so lopsided? What American Israelis versus Jewish Americans, how they view American politics. And it's just, it actually, the question sort of doesn't make sense. I mean, of course, Jewish Americans or American Jews vote for their own president based on the panoply of issues that they face: healthcare, immigration, education, and then as Jay said, the critical issues in the last campaign around COVID and the economy and hate speech. Just like Israeli Jews, they don't vote on a. I would say, because security is a bigger issue, they have
right. But I would even focus it more. We don't vote upon our government's agenda towards American Jews, right?
Of course not, and not even. I mean, increasingly over the last 10 years, there's been even less of a narrow focus on the basic Palestinian question, right? I mean, we saw back in the 2013 election where the whole election was about housing prices and not about is what we American Jews think of as the critical issue. So why would you ask a person to? So most American Jews are liberal Zionists. They are pro-Israel, and they also have criticism of how Israel has handled the occupation and other issues related to Palestinians and pluralism and other things. But they don't express their Zionism at the American ballot box. They express it by being at AIPAC or by contributing, going to Israel, by sending their kids on.
But Jodi, wasn't this different 20, 30, 40 years ago? There were more American Jews voting where the Israeli factor was higher up in their priority system.
So, I mean, I was going to say, so historically, American Jews for a century have been Democrats, and their politics have ranged from the very far left to the center. And then there's been a minority of conservative Jews, politically conservative, not big C conservative. And that minority has sort of solidified, partly with the growth of the Orthodox community here. The only real change in the basic trajectory of that vote was in Carter's reelection. And there was a very backlash against him that I think was motivated in part by this. But no, I don't think even at the height of American Zionism, which probably was in the early days of the state, and then maybe again around 67, I don't think people were making the choice of who should be American president based largely on that. It would be very strange for somebody who's living here to really be such a single issue voter. I mean, I don't think there's always a small cadre of people who are single issue voters on any number of issues. I'm sure we have those who are up or down on Israel. But as Jay said earlier, lots of American Jews who are Democrats would say that some of the things Trump did for Israel, they really celebrate and think were good. They just don't think it overwhelms either their basic political instincts, which is more to the left than the Republican Party or Trump, and it certainly doesn't overtake their concerns about the specific things that Trump has done to threaten free speech, American, the way he's fomented hate and white supremacy and anti-Semitism. It certainly doesn't overwhelm that. But by the way, the poll you cited, the idea that 66% would have chosen Bernie Sanders, that is a significantly lower percentage than the basic Democratic engagement.
100%.
It's somewhere between 70 and 75%. And that, even though it would have been the first Jewish president, which of course some people got very motivated by that, but many, many American Jews, when Bernie Sanders had his biggest moment And it seemed like there was really a chance that he was going to be president. The reality was many American Jews were freaked out by that and absolutely didn't want that. It helped fuel the Bloomberg moment. There was a lot of American Jews who were like, that would be better. And then, Jews really did rally around Biden as the sort of sensible alternative. So I don't think that the idea that 2/3 of American Jews would have supported, that might have been the lowest among the Democrats. I think, is there any Democrat that wouldn't have gotten more American Jewish votes than?
Right, it was definitely the lowest. Definitely the lowest. Yeah, 100%. So I have many questions, but we're on a tight schedule here. So Jay and Jodi, I'll ask you the same question afterwards. I want to be practical and think about how we can strengthen the connection between American Jewry and Israeli Jewry, right? The largest Jewish communities in the world. I know, Jodi, you guys had an interesting project a few weeks ago, maybe, or a few months ago, about asking different people about their ideas about how to strengthen it. I personally think it was it was a very specific, side of the spectrum. So Jay, maybe I'll start with you. How do you see, what practical ways can we use this, very different administration in the U.S. and possibly maybe a different administration in Israel, you never know what's going to be here, to actually strengthen these relations? And maybe it has nothing to do with governments, right?
Well, I think on the one hand, I think relations between the American Jews and Israel are good, and I think they'll continue to be good. And as things like Birthright and other programs, Masa, open up, and there's more of an opportunity to travel to Israel, I think those things will continue to improve. I don't see that as an issue. I think it's important for Israelis to understand. I remember having a conversation with a member of Knesset where they looked at American Jews as like Jews who happen to live in America. And that's not how American Jews view themselves. American Jews view themselves as Americans, in many cases, third, fourth generation Americans who are very involved in American society, who also happen to be Jewish and care about Israel. I am not at all worried about the incoming administration. In some ways, it's going back to a normalcy of how American Jews influence and integrate with an American administration, and how that administration integrates and interacts with Israel. I think Trump was sort of an outlier, because I think that his positions on Israel were so much further down the line than most American Jewish organizations. And I think he took things very quickly in a way that people didn't expect. And I don't think it was because of pressure by the Jewish community. I think it was because of his beliefs, people around him, the evangelical community. I think there were many reasons, why he took those positions. But I think you're going to go back to a time where the relations which were not a bad place. And by the way, my last meeting with Joe Biden, he reiterated to me that his personal background, he spent more time growing up in the homes of Jewish families than in the homes of Catholic families. And I think that he, from that, integrated the values of the Jewish community of education and family and care for Israel. And I think Joe Biden is deeply, deeply committed to a strong, independent Israel. And I'm not worried about that at all.
So actually, he has Jewish grandchildren and a Jewish family, so he's even more, kind of. But I just want to one before we go to Jodi, just shortly. I mean, the divide between Israeli Jews and American Jews, I think I want to connect to what you said. You see going back to a normal type of administration when it comes to American Jewry, yet a majority of Israelis see Trump as a very good president for Israel. And that has to do again with, we're thinking about our inner Israeli life and, peace agreements with Arab countries and the acknowledgement of the Golan Heights, etc. Yet American Jews see that, many of them see it as something which is not as positive, right? So that's kind of where we have a divide.
Well, I don't think American Jews see the progress that has happened under Trump is not positive. I don't think they see these peace deals with Arab countries as not positive. And in fact, I remember when the peace deals were first announced, Biden came out in support of them. I think Biden wants a stable Middle East. I think he wants a Middle East that is safe for Israel. And I think that he will pursue those policies. I have to go back to the fact that even though Israelis see Trump, and basically I think Netanyahu and the Israeli government got out of Trump every single thing that they wanted,
And
with
more.
very little, and more, with very little give back. I think Biden will continue to be pro-Israel. However, I think Israelis have to understand that however good Trump was for Israel, Trump was terrible for the United States. And I think most American Jews, the majority of American Jews, see that Trump was an extremely divisive individual for the American population. And that's what they're reacting to. They're reacting to the fact that COVID became a political issue, that wearing a mask, which everyone says is the safest way to protect us from COVID, was made a political issue.
Right.
And probably cost the lives of tens of thousands of Americans just because of politics. And I think that, going forward, I think you're going to see an impeachment trial. I think you're going to see a continued, I think that the real problem in America is the crisis in the Republican Party. Does the Republican Party want to be the traditional Republican Party of fiscal conservatism and being conservative on social issues? Or do they want to be a party that's taken over by conspiracy theorists, and in which elected officials are afraid of conspiracy theorists out there who are really pressuring the party? Because that's what it's become. And I think unless the Republican Party can sort of, flip things around, I think you're going to see a Republican Party that is very, very different than what we grew up with.
Right.
And I think it's very concerning, because what are their ultimate objectives? The ultimate objectives that they're stating is the downfall of democracy. Mm-hmm. And that would be not only a threat to American people, but especially a threat to American Jews.
Okay, thank you for that. And Jodi, kind of your final remarks regarding a practical approach to the relationship?
Yeah. I really agree with a lot of what Jay said, especially the sort of framing of Israelis think that we're Jews who happen to be American and we're actually Americans who happen to be Jews. And I think that, to some extent, one of the challenges of all those challenges of 2020 have brought us is, we would like to feel kind of inherently closer to other Jews, but we are as different as any other group of people in terms of our values. Anyway, I think there are two really important practical things that Israelis could do to understand American Jews better and to improve relations, not at a governmental level. The first, and this is I know this is way down the list of concerns for Israeli Jews, but a huge concern for the vast majority of American Jews who are either reform or conservative or secular is about the hegemony of the ultra-Orthodox control of religious issues in Israel. It is very alienating for the vast majority of American Jews who are kind of liberal-minded and egalitarian that the Orthodox control things like prayer at the Western Wall and marriage and conversion. That is really unacceptable to the vast majority of American Jews. And while they don't want to control what happens in Israel or how Israeli policies have, it makes them confused about. It makes them feel far from the society.
And the second
thing really is about the occupation and the relationship with the Palestinians. And I think that, many people who love Trump for Israel, you have to kind of believe that the status quo is sustainable in order to think that altogether Trump's policy toward Israel was good. And most American Jews do not think that. They do not like the status quo. They are deeply concerned about how Israel will survive long-term in this situation, and about the day-to-day treatment of Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza. And that is, the Americans have work to do on understanding the way Israelis perceive their own security and the threat, and why they don't feel they can budge on various things. But it's just not going to it's going to create more and more gulfs between American Jews and Israel if things don't change, or if we're not on some kind of a trajectory towards change. And the more dug in that the way that Trump made Netanyahu more dug in on kind of status quo. And, we now see with the election coming, many other conservative alternatives rising, as opposed to a real kind of two-state solution block. But that is really a problem for this relationship. American Jews do not want the occupation to continue forever. They do not want Israel to, run the lives of Palestinians in the West Bank. That is not okay with them.
Okay, so I know we had a lot. If we had more time, I had so many more questions for you, and I kind of stopped myself from asking them. I'll just say that another difference we have is that most of the Israelis would not use the word occupation towards the situation here in Israel towards the Palestinians. Obviously,
although that's a big change. The Israeli government used the word, and the Israeli army used the word occupation for many, many years.
Well, it depends who's running the government. But again, that's a big difference we have, I think, in the terminology between us. So I want to thank you very much, Jodi Rudoren, the editor-in-chief of The Forward, and Jay Ruderman, the president of the Ruderman Family Foundation. Thank you for being us here today, and hope to be in touch in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Zvika.
Thanks, Zvika.